one of the deputy regional foresters in the northern region in Missoula, Montana, and I've been working on this project starting while I was acting associate deputy chief with state and private in the WO this winter, and that's who I am.
And Becky?
Hi, this is Becky Heath. I'm currently acting Associate Deputy Chief in the Washington office with a focus on fire and the transformational work that we're doing nationally and locally in fire. My normal job is a Deputy Regional Forester in Region 6.
Thanks. So how about Mark?
Hi, this is Mark Lichtenstein. I'm the Assistant Director for Planning and Budget in here in the Washington office for Fire and Aviation.
Thanks. Tim?
Hi, I'm Tim Sexton. I manage the Wildland Fire Management Research Applications Program, which is part of the National Fire Decision Support Center. And many of my analysts will be involved in the Risk Management Assistance Team. I will also serve as a team leader on fires this summer.
Thanks, Tim. How about Rick?
Hi, Rick Stratton. I work out of the Forest Service Regional Office and the BLM State Office in Portland, Oregon. I'm the Fire Planning Program Manager, and I've been assisting with long-duration fires and long-term assessment for many years.
Thanks, Rick. And finally, Bill. Bill, are you on mute, maybe? Well, we do have Bill listening in, and he is the Region 3 Director for Fire and Aviation. And so thanks, everyone, for introducing yourselves. But before we get started, we are going to cover some quick logistics. Everyone is in listen-only mode except the panelists, and this webinar is being recorded. We will be showing a video, and you need the audio speakers on your computer turned on, or you won't be able to hear the video. So just to repeat, make sure the speakers on your local computer are turned on. If you have questions, you can type them into the question box. We will monitor the Q&A throughout the call. You can also raise your hand so that we can unmute your speaker so that you can ask a question at the end. If you haven't already entered your PIN, please do so. This does help us manage the call better. And finally, notice there is a document that we've uploaded for your reference. You can access and download this below the questions pane by double-clicking the document. So let's review today's agenda. Several people have been involved in developing the prototype for the Risk Management Assistance Team concept, but today's agenda will include an introduction from Becky, 2 short videos from Vicki Christensen and Leslie Weldon, a presentation about risk management assistance from Tim, Rick, and Dave, and that's followed by an open Q&A period and a closeout from Jane. So now I'll turn it over to Becky.
Thanks, Tonya. Well, welcome again to our webinar, and thank you so much for making time for this today. The Senior Fire Leaders, who are a group that consists of all regional foresters, 2 deputy chiefs, and representation from station directors, charged this team to develop and test approaches to sharing risk on large fires to ensure that line officers and incident commanders have the decision-making tools and broader decision-making space and alignment needed to make hard choices when managing a fire. We must strengthen our ability to minimize unnecessary exposure given values at risk while investing with intent to achieve reasonable objectives and increase the use of fire on the landscape. This team has been working since February to design an approach for testing this season. We're calling our approach Risk Management Assistance Teams, or RMAT, as you've previously heard. We tested ideas and have received important feedback from a group of ICs and force supervisors we invited to a one-day meeting in Albuquerque, and a few of you might be joining us today. And also, we've shared our thinking and received important feedback from the National Fire Leadership Council just in April. You were invited because we think it's likely we may visit you with one of these teams this season. We want you to have at least a little bit of an understanding of where this came from and what the intent is around our map. So next up, our Deputy Chiefs, Leslie Weldon and Vicki Christensen, both of whom are actually engaged in Senior Fire Leader and value the integration and collaboration amongst fire professionals, natural resource professionals, scientists, and line officers. They will share their leader's intent.
I know some people had some issues with the videos playing on their devices. So I can only say that those will be posted for viewing later. I don't know if it could be an internet connection or a device issue, but for some people it did work just fine. So we'll have to figure that out later. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on with the presentation. And we would like to thank Vicki and Leslie for creating those messages for us about their leader's intent. And now we'll hear some background about risk management assistance. And
okay,
Dave,
this is Dave talking. I'm having some technical problems, but I think I can work off of some hard copies without the full thing up. So just starting out with some background information that I think just will hopefully help kind of explain some of why we're doing what we're doing and kind of how this team fits into the broader intention. And a lot of this is coming, as we heard earlier, from the senior fire leaders, and then a core group of senior fire leaders who are actually looking at some specific actions and projects to move us forward. So first, recognize that the primary issue here is that of loss of firefighter life. That's kind of what really got the senior fire leaders engaged in 2016, following the 2015 season, a real strong challenge by the chief that this won't happen again, that we will change the trajectory we're on with the loss of firefighter lives. 18 firefighters on average have been killed, and really we aren't seeing any change in that trend, particularly over the last couple of decades, despite a really significant effort on a safety culture. So something has to change here. The 2016 season was initiated the Life First process, and that was very much a dialogue with the field to understand what's happening out there and gain understanding. Next slide. Again, there's recognition that our efforts to continually extinguishing almost all of the fires at the smallest size possible has resulted in declining ecosystem health and increasing hazard and risk over time. So this approach of continually aggressive initial attack and aggressive suppression is kind of painting us into a picture of a degraded future, and so we need to change that trajectory. Next slide. I think there's also really gaining strong understanding that that approach that I just described is having really significant impacts to our non-fire mission, which is the mission of the Forest Service. And we think about the direct impacts to our recreation assets, ecosystems, the timber management program, and our wildlife management program. All of these programs are being directly impacted by fire on the landscape, but also, and maybe more significantly, being indirectly impacted due to budget issues. The increasing fire cost is having significant impacts on our ability to sustain our conservation mission. Next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, Life First was the effort by the senior fire leaders to address that challenge that the chief gave them after the 2015 season, and recognizing that what could be done in the short amount of time between the close of the 2015 season and the initiation of the 2016 season limited kind of the scale of change. And what the senior fire leaders came to was Life First, and really focusing our dialogue on emphasizing firefighter safety and our firefighters' lives as the priority above all other things. And there was some great dialogue. There were great examples of how that dialogue changed the way people were thinking. Concurrent with that Life First dialogue was some survey work where we asked the field, where were those areas where we are unnecessarily exposing firefighters? And the results basically identified 3 primary areas: aviation operations, driving, and mop-up. And there was kind of an overarching theme that the line officers and agency administrators were exposed to socio-political pressures that helped to drive some of this exposure. Next slide. So after the 2016 fire season, the senior fire leaders came back together again and formed a core group of leaders with an intent to take Life First to the next step, to do some things that we agreed in 2015 needed, particularly around some risk management issues. And so this core group met in Phoenix, along with a few folks from research, myself, Mark Finney, Sarah McCaffrey, I think maybe 1 or 2 others. But then we also had Vicki Christensen, Shauna Garza, Cal Joyner, John Phipps, and Jim Pena there. And I'm probably missing some people, but basically this was an effort to say, okay, what's next? What do we do with the information we have at hand, and what is possible for the 2017 season and beyond? And so one of the recognitions were just basically, where are we at? And there was strong agreement that the information from Life First needed to be acted upon. We needed to really focus on the resilience and sustainability of the lands we manage and how fire management has such a critical role in that. And there was strong recognition that the fire budget was an issue that needed to be addressed. And it's not suggesting that fire management is irresponsible with funding, but the way we react and the way the system promotes certain outcomes needed to be addressed if we're going to address the long-term sustainability of our organization. Next slide. So during that meeting, we basically did the core team, with some help from some researchers such as myself, came up with a few different task teams. And so here are 3 of the primary ones we discussed. One is looking at the incentives of our fire managers, both the line officers and the incident management teams. And there's some work going on there. We're recognizing that this really isn't a strong 2017 initiative because of the challenges and kind of changing an established incentive system, but it is something we really want to spend some effort on how do we incentivize the strongest levels of risk management that we can utilize the best information available to change the trajectory we're on in terms of increasing risk. There's also an effort on what we're calling learning key performance indicators, recognizing that if we want something different, we're going to have to be able to measure where we're at right now and kind of identify how and if we are going in the direction we hope to go. And so those are some key performance indicators that will be tied into this RMAT effort, but probably some dialogue down the line. And then finally, the decision support, and that is what we're here to talk about. The risk management assistance teams are that decision support that we're hoping to deliver, that was envisioned by the core senior fire leader group in this Phoenix meeting. Next slide. So the risk management assistance teams kind of were founded, and one of the things that kind of let us think that this was possible is the investment that had been made in the National Fire Decision Support Center. It was chartered a little less than 10 years ago to develop and apply and deliver risk-based analytics. And so we've had multi-million dollars invested over the last 8 or 9 years to move the science that creates the tools the risk-based analytics, to build those tools, and then to work with the RD&A to develop those tools into field-based applications, along with training a whole suite of analysts out in the field with these tools. So that really gives us the background and kind of the capacity to do what we think we're proposing here. And then the other thing to recognize is that in our Red Book, there is a very clear risk management framework. And when we think about that risk management framework, right now, a lot of times it's helping the field, but it is kind of a simple conversation of, did we discuss the values of risk? Yes, we did. Did we interact with the community? Yes, we did. And what we're suggesting is that when we're talking about these tens of millions of dollars of investments in these fires that create huge exposure to the firefighters and create huge exposure to the resources we value in the communities that we support, we need to be better than just simply asking questions. We need to dig into it with analytics, with risk-based thinking, and a really broader understanding of uncertainty. Next slide. So kind of the overview of what we're proposing here, or what we've proposed and what we're getting ready to initiate this coming season, which is actually fully upon us, are these risk management assistance teams. And kind of the way we're envisioning them is it will be led by a line officer, an experienced line officer with significant fire experience and some relationship with this group that's kind of helped our thinking move along. That would be the lead in supporting the local agency administrator. We also list a strategic operational planner. I'm going to kind of talk about that as kind of a broader position. It's more kind of the technical lead. And within those technical leads, we're really looking at some of our most experienced folks from both an analytical and with analytical and operational background. Sometimes those will be strategic operational planners. Other times it would be people in other positions that would have that, both the operational experience, but also some really strong recognition of the analytical capacity that we have out there. And then we're looking at a team of 2 to 4 analysts that come from the pool of analysts that we both have within Wildland Fire RD&A, the teams here in Missoula associated with my group and the Fire Lab, as well as some of the outstanding analysts that we have in the field. So certainly there'd be an intention that at least one, if not more, of the analysts would have some strong local experience, or at least at the GAC level that is hosting these teams. So our intention is to test this approach on 5 to 10 wildfires in this coming season. Next slide. And the main intent here is to really buy time for the line officer and the incident commander. We recognize that time is the biggest asset, the most important asset we have in decision making in these very stressed environments. And so by bringing in this capacity, both for line office at the line level, as well as the operational and analytical capacity, we can buy time to develop strategic alternative courses of action, where we're not limited to, yes, that seems like it'll work, we better go do it because we have to act soon. We can bring this capacity to bear to look for the right, for the best course of action. You know, one of the ways we intend to do that is to be very analytical, to use a lot of the tools that Rick's going to describe in a minute, to establish what we're getting when we choose one alternative versus the other. You know, I kind of said the best, but that's, you know, I'm going to go back on that a little bit. We recognize that it's very, very difficult to identify the single best strategy. Each strategy or alternative has some things that are good about it and some things that aren't as good about it. And so we're trading off the exposure of our firefighters, the investment of our resources against the likelihood of being successful in protecting X resource while we may be less successful protecting Y resource. We recognize that there are trade-offs that are incredibly complex, but by building out that this alternative gets us this stuff and this other alternative gets us this stuff, we can kind of be better at choosing the one that is most efficient and effective at getting what we want out of our fire management problem. Again, one of the critical things we want to emphasize is that it's advisory in nature. There is no intention of this team coming and saying, alternative A is the best alternative, and if you choose alternative C, you're wrong. Or we have the authority to choose alternative A, even though you want to choose alternative C. That is certainly not the intention. It is, here are the trade-offs amongst alternative A and alternative C. And also, if alternative A appears like it's in the interest of the agency most strongly, but alternative C creates a lot of pressure for you locally, maybe these teams can work with the regional office to help share that socio-political risk that may get us to alternative B. So again, I think that's where we're trying to move this, recognizing that we very much want to be a support role in bringing alternatives to the table, not a judging and not a decision-making body. Next slide. Again, we do not believe that IMTs and AAs are being completely inefficient. We believe that improvements in efficiency can be realized through increased use of analytics and increased capacity to buy us time. And we also believe that as efficiency increases, unnecessary exposure declines, and our ability to meet our mission is enhanced. Next slide. So again, what it is not a cost accounting process. This is not a large fire cost review. We're not going to be evaluating beef jerky, bottled water, office trailer cost, copy service, personnel overtime. It's not an intervention in the relationships that exist between the incident commanders, the incident management teams, and the agency administrators, nor is it a usurpation of the respective authorities and responsibilities. We are looking at that support function to bring analytics and enhanced risk thinking into this time-sensitive environment. Next. Again, we are emphasizing making good decisions. We are not trying to reduce cost at the expense of relationships and impacts to high-valued resources and assets, nor are we looking to shift risks and costs to our neighbors. We're looking at improving the risk-based decisions that we make, recognizing that when we act in haste and choose the next alternative, we may lose that opportunity to get the best alternative because of the progression of time and the allocation of resources to things that aren't working. We may lose that opportunity in the near future where we could be successful. So, next slide. So I'm going to hand it over to Rick, and he's going to give some examples of some work that he's done over the last few years and some other folks have done that look at some of the kind of tools we're intending to bring at the analytical side of things that hopefully can inform the decisions that are being made on the fire. And then I'll take a little time to show some of the work we've done on understanding aviation use and how we might be able to support some things in real time. Rick?
All right, thanks, Dave. So we didn't want to spend a lot of time showing you all these different tools. Many of you are familiar with some of them. Many of them are in with this, and we've been using them to make better risk-informed decisions. You know, those would be FS Pro and short-term and near-term fire behavior, relative risk rating, organizational needs, and then there's some standalones that we use like Wind Ninja. Tim had asked me just to demonstrate the use of FS Pro and the values of risk tables to help us better make risk-informed decisions at a multiple fire level or at a GAC level. And so that's what I'm going to show you now. I'll talk about these first three, and then Dave will talk about the last two. All right, so in 2015, as many of you are aware, we had a really intense fire season, and I was assisting with several fires individually, but then when it got worse, middle of August, I went back to the mothership, and I started helping inform the Northwest MAC about how we could use science to move our resources where they could be most effective and where our firefighters could be safe. And so initially, I'd done this a little bit in central Idaho in 2005, 2006. So we did several FS Pro runs, all on these different fires, starting and ending at the same time. And then we looked at the probability of spread in relation to those. We did this in Washington and Oregon, and it's a pretty labor-intensive process. And it isn't easy to time all these things and then get all the information you need and create the products all at the same time to provide feedback that's useful. So we did that, and you can take these FS Pro runs, and then you can pull up values tables and see how they relate. So I'm going to just show you one values table here on one fire from Washington. And I think you've seen these. The probabilities are at the top of the FS Pro run, and as they relate to the different values down below. So what I did was I tried to create these values tables, show these values tables to the Northwest MAC, looking at here some of the things we care about, and then highlighted some of those that I saw that I thought were of particular interest. And one of those at the top here is the building structures, you know, the building clusters, and within those are the homes that we care about. So, you know, this was useful, but then I started going through one fire after another and after another. In the next slide, I show you all these value tables that were just from Washington. And as I started discussing these things, you know, I started getting it was difficult for them to process all of this information. I was used to this as an analyst, and I had been working on a lot of these fires, so I had an easier, better, I had more experience with this and was able to synthesize this better, but it just did not work. It was too much information for the MAC. So I went back to the drawing board and tried to think of a different way that I could bring all this science together in a way that they could synthesize, it could be understood, and it could help us make better decisions. So I came up with this communities risk PowerPoint, which was turned into a PDF that I in turn shared with the Northwest MAC and the execs, and this was much better. So on August 19th, there was a thermal trough. It's a heat low over the area, and then it was going to be followed by 2 days of really strong western winds, and I was quite concerned. And so what I did was I looked at all these big fires in Oregon and Washington, and also those that were emerging. One was Goodell and one was Twist, and then put a little star, made up a key, very simple. 1 star was possible, 2 stars were likely, 3 stars were very likely. And then I created slides of each of the different areas so we could get a sense of the firefighter interactions as well as possible directions of fire movement. What really enabled me to do this was my knowledge of the fires moving this summer, because I'd worked on many of them, and particularly I was on a call every morning with the National Weather Service forecast centers, and I could get a sense of what kind of weather, particularly the wind, they were going to experience in the different areas throughout the 2 states. So this was one of the products I started with the Reach Fire. So this is infrared. You can see the legend up in the upper left. But what I did was just simply, okay, what's the probability of these 2 fires merging together, Black Canyon and Reach, and see the 3 stars, so that was very likely. What's the possible fire movement going down into the areas of concern, which in this case was Mansion, and then you can see there was 1 star in the next 3 days. It's possible, but based on my analysis, it was not very likely. And I continued on to different areas. I'll show you another one. This was Twist area. So what's the likelihood it could impact Twist? Very likely in the next 3 days. What about Winthrop? It's possible. And then continuing on to the OMAC area. Beaver Lake, and what's the possibility of Lime and Blue fires merging together with Tunk Block? Very likely. The movement of the other fires into the different communities. You know, at this stage we were focused on communities, lives, and travel corridors. And so I just tried to keep it simple. I did this kind of analysis for both states, and after the presentations to the Northwest MAC, they would deliberate on where the resources were, which they saw were the highest priorities based on not just what their experience at the time, but you know, looking out the next 3 days. And in a few cases, we're moving resources based on this analysis. So we will leverage all the existing models we have now, but we'll also use new technologies that we're developing and charting and looking things a little differently with very skilled analysts to help us to be able to get at this exposure concern and fire benefits and that kind of thing. All right, Dave, kick it back over to you.
All right, thanks. So, you know, I think there's a lot of capacity there for us to better understand the likelihood of fire impacting the values that are identified, and the, you know, and bringing the objectives that the line officers put forward, the agency administrators put forward, in a risk-based framework in terms of the likelihood and potential consequence. We can start talking about fire behavior, fire impacts a little bit with these kinds of analysts as well. One of the things I'm going to talk about a little bit is how we can try to observe what's happening with our resources and how the fire is or is not being brought to conclusion using the different suppression techniques we have, and how that information can be brought into the ongoing management of the fire. One of the things I mentioned earlier is that real strong commitment to evaluating alternative courses of action. And one of the other aspects of having these teams present is that they'll be there for the duration of the event or the duration of their need to be there, and recognizing when a course of action is not necessarily working and really needs to be revised. One of the things we've realized in our past observations kind of collectively, and the stories we collectively hear, is that there seems to be a strong commitment to holding on to a strategy beyond its useful life. So going big box and sticking with it, or going direct even though we're continually seeing things that aren't working. So what we're talking about here is going to come across a little bit as critiquing, but what we want to try to focus on is that we're intending to bring this information to bear in the midst of the fire event so that we can have discussions of how is this working for us and how can we alter the way we're using these resources to better achieve our objectives, and are these objectives even still feasible given what we're seeing out there. So this is a map of the fire from last year and aviation usage. Each of the circles is a large air tanker drop. Each of the triangles represents a VLAT drop. There were over 600 LAT or VLAT drops on this event. It was the most significant use of aviation resources in the history of the Forest Service. And so if you look in the upper left-hand corner, when the fire gets going, there's a lot of LAT and VLAT usage. And this is just our Forest Service resources. The state resources that were on here aren't represented here. Early on in the fire, it was a state fire. So this is not a complete picture. But what we see is that there's heavy use of LATs and VLATs early in the event. And it doesn't seem like we're being successful, that these drops are being, the fire's progressing beyond them. And so that starts to ask the question of what is the intent and the objective of using these resources in these places? Are we simply trying to buy time, and we recognize that there's a very valid need to buy time and just try to slow down the head a little bit so we can get ahead of protecting some resources? Are some of these drops being used for point protection, and how is that working? And are some of these drops intending to stop the fire progression, but they're simply not working? And what are the conditions where these drops are occurring in terms of time of day, fire behavior, position on the landscape. All of these questions, we want to start bringing line and incident commanders into this discussion. We recognize that aviation kind of works in a bubble right now, and we're trying to figure out better ways so that there can be joint communication. So go to the next slide. And so this is the same picture, the same fire. And on the right-hand side, you see all of the drops that had occurred on this event. On the left-hand side, you just see what had happened in the last week. And so this was late in the progression of the fire. It was the middle of September. And what we see is there's this very, very major aviation operation that is supporting an intended burnout operation. If you look at it on the left, you'll see an FS Pro contour under there. And it's a very interesting contour because it goes from away from the fire as high probability into the fire as low probability. And the reason that is this run is basically using the burnout operations to project forward into the fire, because the fire at this time is hung up and it's not moving forward. So what we see is a fire that is largely hung up, and an intention to, and the use of tens of millions of dollars of retardant to prep a burnout operation. And so that raises the question of, is extensive application of retardant prior to a burnout operation appropriate and necessary? And it very well may be that yes is the answer, but we need to start engaging that conversation. And we need to, when we're talking about a $10 to $50 million strategy, we should be bringing in higher levels of both line and kind of Washington office decision support to really evaluate it. It also begs the question of, if we're going to commit this and the fire's hung up right now, what's the timing? Do we have an opportunity to watch this, or do we really need to start hundreds of drops over the next several days to make this happen? Again, the answer very well may be yes, this is a perfectly appropriate strategy based on a risk assessment of likelihood and outcome and potential outcomes. But we need capacity to answer those questions using a strong risk management framework with the best analysts available. And when we make a decision, and when we're talking about a $50 million decision that creates incredible exposure to our pilots, we want it elevated to higher levels of authority so that the local line officer is very aware of what's going on, and if necessary, the regional office may become engaged. Next slide. We can also talk about ground resources in a similar manner, and this is some work John Phipps and I did several years ago, and just saying that the amount of work that happens out on the fire line is related to the amount of exposure that we have. There's quality of exposure, meaning how dangerous is it out there, but then there's also quantity of exposure, how many people out there are working, and recognizing that both of those result in injuries and fatalities. And so go to the next slide. And again, this is an extreme example, and it may come across as Monday morning quarterbacking. That is certainly not the intent. It's, can we start bringing this information into the midst of the fire so that we can start seeing, like, hey, when we've done these things in the past and the fire continues to move on, what should we change so that those outcomes don't happen in the future? This was the Chips fire and the Plumas from 2012. What we see that there were a total of 6 million meters of line that was built on this fire, yet the amount of line that actually was part of the final fire perimeter was only 172,000 meters. Thus, we're talking about basically a 2% level of efficiency. So if we can get in there earlier and start saying, okay, we're seeing the fire doing these things, we recognize that the fire spread and the fire behavior is looking like this. Let's talk about going to the right place first, because if we don't go there first, it might not be available to us in the future. So those are just some examples. Again, the intent is to have these dialogues at the appropriate level early in the event and throughout the event, so that we can first come up with that that strong course of action that gives us the different sets of outcomes that we most want relative to other alternatives. And then we continually learn about what's working, what's not working, and we adjust our strategies accordingly to that, based on that information. So I think that's all for me.
So this is Tim Sexton, and just to recap, you've heard from Vicki Christensen, Leslie Weldon, and Becky Heath from the Washington office, voicing their desires to reduce unnecessary firefighter exposure and to respond to life first comments from the field, where they identified areas where they feel we're taking on unnecessary risk to our firefighters. And some of the proposals that we've got in providing enhanced decision support to help us make better decisions to reduce this unnecessary exposure. Dave and Rick provided information on some of the tools, and also recognition that this work will not dictate our response in management of wildfire, but provide options that have been well analyzed and traded off against each other to identify those that likely will give us the best outcome for these large, longer duration fires. We'll now open this up to all participants for comments and questions.
All right,
so we have,
oh, go ahead, Tammy.
oh, I'm sorry. We have a question from Matt Thompson. He's had his hand raised for quite a while. Matt, do you want to put your voice in the room?
Hi, I didn't know how to use my app, so I didn't realize my hand was raised. I'm good.
Okay, thanks, Matt. We have another question for the panel. It's, would or will the RMATs create analytics that incorporate and deal with suppression strategies as indicated in some of our outdated and old yet controlling land management plans? That's open to any of the panelists.
This is Tim Sexton. I guess I'll respond to that. Yeah, and the answer is yes. We use the land management plans as the strategic guidance for how we respond to wildfires, and our WFDS incident objectives should be tiered to the land management plans. But we also recognize that many of those plans don't have good information about wildfire response in them, and so we will tailor alternative courses of action that, in consultation with the forest supervisor and other staff, best meet the objectives that are in the land management plan, or the intent of the land management plan, even though the plan itself may not have those well articulated for fire. Any other panelists want to respond to that?
I think the other thing that we would hope to bring in that situation is the feasibility and potential exposure of pursuing something, and recognizing that there's trade-offs, and there are times when you simply can't meet the objectives in land management plans, and there's times when the land management plans directly contradict itself with regards to fire. So our intent is certainly to just inform the trade-offs amongst meeting land management objectives, while also talking about the feasibility and potential exposure to achieving one objective over the other.
The one thing I'll add, this is Rick, along the same lines, is, you know, last year we assisted with some of those inquiry fires, and, you know, we looked through, you know, in Excel, we looked at what is the guidance from the land and resource management plans, and then how has that been applied in WFDS and strategic objective shapes and management requirements. And then we looked at what are the incident objectives and requirements. And then we look further into the incident action plan and what is being applied on the ground, and are these things consistent. And I think sometimes we can fix some of the problems we see, including firefighter exposure, by just seeing if we're in alignment with these kinds of things. So that's something else that we could spend time on and look at.
And
Great.
This is Jane, and I might chime in as well. I really appreciate the question because it brings to light the need for even more upstream work. And I think it recognizes the importance of how we address fire in our land and resource management plans. So that acknowledgement has been a lot of our discussion in developing this, but also recognizing what steps could we take now to really still engage the discussions in real time involving agency administrators and incident management teams with the best analytics at the moment. And that does not release that link to the land and resource management plan, but doesn't stalemate us while we're in this place of making those upstream decisions. So just wanted to chime in and really appreciate the question.
Okay, we have a question from Patty Gratham, and I just unmuted you, Patty. Go ahead and ask if you'd like.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Patty.
Thank you very much. So I suspect this is going to be one of those questions that it's going to be sort of it depends kind of answer, but you know, given that Northern California has you know, not only had a good winter, we've had a record-setting winter in a lot of places. Me and my neighbors are looking pretty closely at, you know, using natural fire to accomplish some, you know, some treatment out there in the landscape. If my objectives from the get-go are along those lines, do we foresee deploying, potentially deploying these teams to provide some assistance there?
This is Dave Calkin. You know, we haven't specifically talked about that. I think the full team with line officer help and technical lead may not be necessary, but I think we are putting together a pool of analysts that could certainly support you if you feel that additional capacity is needed beyond the GAC level. I know, you know, you've got some great analysts in California that probably have some pretty extensive experience in those areas, but again, I think we are really looking to support and gain experience and knowledge, and that's certainly one of the emphasis areas. So I don't know if we'd want to bring an entire team unless it was a major effort to bring fire on the landscape, but I think we will have a cadre of analysts that could be brought to bear on those problems, and maybe we can bring in some risk thinkers to kind of help with that as well.
So I would throw out there just kind of be, you know, potentially considering that kind of thing. You know, one of the many intriguing benefits of these teams is just, you know, helping that communication bridge between both the region and the national level.
Yeah, and this is Rick, and I'd encourage the discussion, and that'll get it started, and then, you know, the decision support that we've had in the past for long duration fires will continue to exist, and if this fire that's a nomination or for RMATs to support, if it isn't at the right time, then that whole other capacity is available. And so, you know, I would just encourage those discussions and those questions, because that's how we can find the best match for the analytics that we have.
Okay, thank you for your question, Patty. I'm going to go to the next question. Will the IC or agency administrator request an RMAT, or will one be assigned to large fires?
Bill Van Bergen developed a ordering protocol for the RMAT, and typically the RMAT would be ordered at the regional office level. Although if a forest is interested in having an RMAT, they could engage the regional office in the discussion about getting one. I don't know, Bill, do you have any other comments on that?
Oh, yeah. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, good. Okay. That's how I see it, is conversation either between the RO and the Washington office in terms of observing what's going on at the time, or at Pacific Forest requesting RMAT assistance. But I think we're envisioning that the delegation will come from regional forester in terms of expectations, what we've talked about so far.
Okay.
And this is Jane, and I'll chime in on that. Given that this is a test year, definitely the way we see it working this year is in coordination between the WO and the region. So relative to requested or assigned, we see that being pretty fluid, or I would guess I see it that way. As we monitor the fire season and we see an opportunity with a fire where the learning might be a pretty high probability, if the WO picks that up through their regular monitoring and contacts out, or it goes the other way, the thing we want to avoid, obviously, is something that's clunky or surprises the folks in the operations itself. And so we're putting together a process to minimize, if not eliminate, that.
Thank you for the clarification. We have a couple more questions that gets at more of the RMAT teams and dispatching. So the next question is, how many RMAT teams are there and how will they be dispatched? And secondary to that is, who do they work for and will they be given a delegation of authority to spell out expectations? So Bill or Tim?
Well, I think we're still working on a number of teams. This is Bill. And that's some work that that our leapfrog group is still working on. So we've got quite a bit of interest, which is good. So we'll that's still a task for us as a group to get those organized. On the second piece, I have worked up a draft delegation with some expectations in there that all regions can use. Again, I think our discussion so far has been, as I said before, that this would probably come from the regional forester with a set of expectations and a timeline.
Okay, thanks, Bill. I'm going to jump over to one of the questions of a hand raised. So Bill Honneberg, I've unmuted you. Would you like to ask your question of the group?
Actually, the question about how would the team be ordered, that was my question, so I think that's been answered.
Okay, thank you. Will there be any follow-up webinars or workshops for analysts who may, who may assist these teams to get up to speed and on the same page about the most effective analysis tools and techniques?
I can take that one, Rick. So we have folks in mind that we could utilize, but one of those elements that will be really critical will be the highly skilled analyst at the regional level, so that knows that area. And so we have been identifying these folks, and we'll continue to do so. We might have 2 to 4 teams, and we will make sure that the analytics we need to bring to bear, the skills will be on each of the teams to do so. So there won't be a formal training, but we will be able to have discussions and select the people that will be able to do this kind of thing. And I think it's also important to keep in mind, this is a test year. We're testing this. There will be a lot of learning that will come of this. I think there'll be some great successes, and there'll be some things that we need to improve, and we'll reevaluate it in the fall. if this goes operational or we double or triple the size of the RMAT teams, then most definitely we're going to need to start providing more support in how to develop some of the tools that we will be testing and developing this year.
Yeah, this is Dave. I think also we recognize that there are a set of tools out there that probably the analysts that will be tapped will have some experience in. We're looking at some analysts with certain types of experience that can support certain types of events. There will always be that regional kind of flavor and component to it. But a lot of this is learning how this information can best be delivered to inform things. So again, there isn't a cookbook of you do an FS Pro, a near term, you intersect with this and this to get this. It's kind of a suite of things that we're looking at, and we're going to have people with different types of experience. We'll have people focusing more on suppression resource and aviation usage, while others are focusing on fire behavior and impacts. So I think we're going to be learning, but there is a rich set of tools, I think, that the analysts have out there already that we can leverage.
Thanks, Dave. Another question is, speaking more to the logistics of the RMAT engagement on a Type 1 or Type 2 incident when the incident management team has the same skill set and analytical tools. So Bill Van Bruggen or Tim?
I think that's a good question for Tim.
So if the team has the same set of tools and they have the time to use them for developing alternative courses of action and trading them off, there may not be a need for an RMAT. However, in many cases on large, complex, long-duration fires, those analysts that are assigned to the team are busy with shorter-term duties that don't afford them the time to look out at strategic alternatives and trade them off against each other. There are also some tools that are just emerging and likely are not well known or used by the folks that are on incident management teams. What we would visualize in the future is that all teams would be able to do these things that RMAT is proposing to do in a trial basis this summer and perhaps next year.
And this is Jane. The other thing that's unique about the assistance team is the presence of the experienced line officer. And a lot of these places where we expect to, the large fires that we can learn a lot from, already have experienced line officers there. But the idea of what we want to test is that line officer that might be able to come with the additional analytics that is a little bit, if you will, arm's length, maybe helping see ways to create the space for these discussions between the agency administrator and the incident management team. We've been working on that, for years, and I think have really honed a lot of skills. But there again, if we've got an incident in this coming year we think we can really learn from, that's something that's unique to the setup of the RMATs as well.
Great, thanks, Jane and Tim. Another question is this would be for Tanya and Tim, is the webinar going to be posted somewhere? Folks would like to share it with some of their fire analytics or other individuals that would benefit.
Yes, the webinar will be posted. I think one of the last slides will have the website that the webinar will be posted to. There will also be the opportunity when folks visit that website to ask additional questions that may come up later and have a response provided at some point within a few hours after the question is posted.
Thanks, Tim. There was some feedback that we had. We had a document that was hosted within our webinar, and we pulled that down. It was outdated. So at the closing of this webinar, Tanya will send out that attachment that we had wanted you guys to download. So just in case you downloaded it before this message, before me passing this on, please delete that one, and a new communications plan will be coming out from Tanya Opperman. There are no other questions or in the queue, nor are there any hand raises. Is there anybody? Well, everybody's muted, so if there's something that you would like to share or ask of the panelists, either type in a question or you can raise your hand and I'll unmute you to speak. Oh, wait a minute. RMAT team, so here was a question. Okay, that we already did that one though, how they were going to be dispatched. I think Bill hit on that earlier. Are there any other questions? Oh, Kevin Elliott, one just popped in. Kevin, I just unmuted you.
So earlier you talked about, again, this year being a trial with X number of RMET, and then I heard you mention about, then as you roll this footage forward, then scaling up the number of RMATs. And so I'm trying to visualize this. You've got an RMAT coming alongside an existing incident management team that already has many of these same skills, et cetera. So you talked about how logistics of that, but I guess I'm curious of, instead of building up more RMATs to come alongside existing agency administrators and existing Type 1 incident commanders and their teams, are we not developing something to actually improve? If there's a lack in skill or a lack in analytics, what are we doing instead of increasing RMATs? What are we doing to help the existing incident management teams and agency administrators develop these skills, as opposed to sending a whole separate team to come alongside them, if that makes sense?
Yeah, this is Dave. That absolutely makes sense, and I think we're very much interested in pursuing those ways forward. And I think we're not saying that this RMAT is the next thing that needs to happen, is to bring these people to insert themselves here. This is capacity we want to develop at the local level, particularly in the high-risk forests. And these are capacities we want to enhance in the incident management teams. So the RMAT as kind of a structure going forward may not be the most advantageous by any way, but we want to gain experience in kind of that relationship and how we move forward with getting these skills enhanced within the organization we have. And maybe the way we are approaching it and the organizations we have in place need to be fundamentally changed. We don't know that yet, but this is an opportunity to learn. One of the things we recognize is risk-based thinking and long-term strategic planning capacity is very limited supply in the existing structures. There isn't a lot of training on those basic skills of strategic planning and risk-based thinking. So how do we get that, and what's the most effective way to get that? Again, Life First was very much just, we're going to talk to people because that's what we can do now. We're seeing RMAT as a next step of, we can do this now to get better understanding of that risk-based management and where it's strong and where it needs support, and how that moves us forward really is going to be informed by this year. We're not saying this is the way forward.
All right, thanks for that response, Dave. And are there any other questions? We don't see any questions typed in. We don't see any hands raised at the moment. So I believe we'll go ahead and turn it over to Jane for a closeout.
Okay, thanks. And thanks to all of you for being part of the conversation now, and if you were part of some of our previous development conversations. And also looking forward to working with you into the season. As you think about this and so forth, if you have more questions, suggestions, please reach out to us, and we are likely going to be reaching out to you as well. I want to emphasize that this is a test year, emphasis on learning, it's advisory. The feedback in this discussion has been very helpful for us. The more information you'll see on the screen, a website that we've got going live, that's where the communication plan will be. And all of the group that's kind of developed it so far, all of our contact information is within that. So reaching out to any of us, a lot of us know one another. Folks that are on the webinar, you may have a relationship with some member of the team, and we're all open to further discussion and learning together. We're really excited to test this year. As we've talked with folks in the connection with senior fire leaders, the regional foresters, I sense, I think we all do, a real eagerness to continue to expand our skills relative to this risk management approach across all of our work, but in particular in our suppression response to large fires. And the corollary to that, getting more fire on the landscape, and especially responding to what we've learned from Life First and our commitment to reducing exposure. So continue to need your help in engaging. Thanks again. And unless there's any question about that more information, I'll turn it back over to Tammy and Tanya, and sure appreciate your leadership in managing the webinar for us.
Great, glad to do that. Are there any questions for Jane? All right, well, we did have that problem with the handout, so you will be getting an automated email that will show up in your inbox from GoToWebinar that will have a link to this recording as well as the handout. We'll try to make sure that happens, and always check back to the website. And with that, we'll go ahead and close out the webinar. Thanks so much for your attention.